When you say religious climate, first thing comes to mind, we were driving from the airport, the zone leaders, assistants drove us from the airport to meet our mission president and such. Or to, and I remember one of the assistants said, this is a very Lutheran heavy area. And I thought he was talking about just that suburb that we happened to be in. And he couldn't have made a bigger understatement. Minnesota is very, very, very Lutheran, a lot of German and Scandinavian descent, and then very Catholic. And so those are the big two faiths in Minnesota. And not all of them very active in their faith, and some extremely active in their faith. Very tradition-based faiths, where their father's father has been Lutheran Catholic for the past however long. The Minnesota-Minneapolis Mission, so there's 8 stakes covering the state of Minnesota, and that's how the mission that's what the mission demographics are, is the boundaries of those 8 stakes. So those 8 stakes, so the mission covers about 3/4 of Minnesota, a quarter of Wisconsin, a smidgen of Iowa, a smidgen of Michigan, and then a portion of Canada. And so you can imagine some of the state boundaries there, especially outside the Twin Cities, are rather large. The Duluth, Minnesota stake, which covers part of Michigan and part of Canada and part of Wisconsin, is good. We're talking 6-7 hours or more from north to south boundaries of that stake. So from what I've heard, don't know if this is true, I've heard it's the second biggest mission in the continental U.S. with the exception of Fargo, North Dakota. Not 100% that is true. It's a very cold mission, a very beautiful mission, very green in the summertime. And majority of the mission is probably more Stixy farm, middle of nowhere areas, but majority of the missionaries are probably in the suburbs in the cities of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and so forth. Also a very diverse mission. There's English speaking and Spanish speaking. There's also Hmong speaking and Asian dialect. And in downtown Minneapolis, you'll find pretty much every ethnicity you can think of. A lot of Chinese exchange students go to the University of Minneapolis. And in North Minneapolis, there's a very, very large influx of West African immigrants there. And I'm not sure why. All I know is if I were going from warm Africa, I wouldn't choose Minnesota. But I don't know if a good chunk of them are refugees or what all the reasons are. But a very large chunk of West African members, which made up a very good chunk of the investigators in that area. So I feel like most of the wards and stakes I served in were small wards and branches. Most of my mission was sort of in the country sticks areas. And so most of my wards were around 50 to 120. I spent some time in the suburbs, and you go there and you get some pretty big wards, 150 to 200 or more attending. And I do know some of the certain challenges there depend on demographic and where you're at. In the Stixy areas, it might be the challenge of getting people to church when they live so far out there. As a missionary, it's hard to decide where to go to contact because you only have a certain set of miles. And so you're like, well, if we go an hour and a half out of our area, we may find somebody. And if we find somebody, that means we have to drive there every week, which means, hurts our miles. If we get members to go, then the investigator cancels on us. Then we feel like we've wasted the member's time going an hour and a half and no one's there. So that was a bit difficult thing in the sticks, was distance. And I also noticed depending where you're at, the challenges varied as far as finding people who were receptive. For instance, I served in one of my areas, more ritzier suburbs, where a lot of people were like higher ups to Target and Best Buy and other places that are headquartered there in Minneapolis. So those areas, it was tough because a lot of people just felt like they didn't really need anything more. Their houses are nice, everything's nice, they got the great job. And again, a lot of the religious background is very tradition-based. And so they really just don't feel like they need anything more. On the other side of it, one of my districts was that ritzy suburb area, and then the other missionaries in our district served in a very, a more poor part of the suburbs. And there the challenge was just the commitment factor. They could find 20 people easily in a week, but then on whether or not those people would continue to commit to the invitations and the lessons and such, or whether or not they'd fall off and you couldn't find them again, was hard. Whereas in the ritzy areas, it was very difficult to find people. When you did, these were their mindset was this 9-to-5 business corporation mindset. So they kept appointments. They let you know if they're going to cancel. So the challenges kind of varied, I think, depending on the demographic, and it could either be, once again, distance, or just, once again, their mindset. If they're corporate, if they live corporate lives, they very much have that very regimented mindset. And so the challenges kind of varied, I think, depending. I would try to focus more on working with members, but maybe going about it in a different way. I think sometimes I felt like I worried or stressed so much as a missionary that sometimes I think I came across as like robotic to members. And rather than helping them realize that they can do missionary work every day, and that there's multiple missionary opportunities I think we all have that we just don't think of as missionary work, I think sometimes my mindset would be, we're going to give them a commitment to give this friend of theirs a Book of Mormon, and I think, what I'm trying to say, I think sometimes I would intimidate the member more than encouraging the member. I think when we help people realize that we have missionary opportunities every day, and even if they're small, those small things build, and that people will, that the Lord will place people on our path, that people will be ready in the Lord's timing. I think that's encouraging, and I think so. I would do member work more along those lines rather than, I think the way I did it on the mission was just have these big commitments in my mind, and kind of almost unintentionally made the member feel that, if they're not doing these big commitments, inviting someone to church or giving them a Book of Mormon right off the bat, then they're not doing missionary work. And I don't think I ever said that. I don't think I ever really thought that. But I think subconsciously, and to them, I think it came across that way. Was just, and I think now I would focus more on member work, but in a more encouraging way, really helping them to recognize missionary opportunities rather than challenging them to have these big moments. So I served, my first area was West St. Paul, and we covered mostly just the suburbs, a bit of downtown St. Paul. My second area was East Bloomington, which is a suburb, probably the biggest suburb, I think, of Minneapolis. We covered just the east side of that, along with a bit of another suburb called Eden Prairie. My third area, one of my all-time favorites, was Barron, Wisconsin. It was a very small town area, covered a lot of little small towns, very large area. My fourth was Duluth, Minnesota. We covered about half of the city, and then the city of Superior, Wisconsin. And that's up right on the border of Wisconsin, right by Lake Superior. Then my next area was called Weaver Lake. It covered just portions of two suburbs of Minneapolis, very small area in size, but large area in amount of people. My next area after that was Hutchinson. Once again, small, Stixie area, majority Spanish-speaking. So with that area, I was with a Spanish-speaking companion, and we did both English and Spanish work. And my last area was New Prague. It should be pronounced New Prague, but it's Minnesota, so they're going to say New Prague. And but it's from, a lot of the people there are from Czechoslovakian descent, Prague's Czechoslovakia, and that was another smallish area, a lot of little towns. So.